It is great to have you join us on this platform today. Thanks for clicking on. We really appreciate it. This term in our church family, one of the ways we're helping each other grow in discipleship is to join together in Bible reading groups. And loads of us have. Some of us are in core groups, and part of our core elements is reading the Bible. And so some core groups, along with our Bible reading groups, have planned to read through Matthew's Gospel as we desire to fix our attention on Jesus. Reading through Matthew's Gospel isn't a bad idea. Matthew's Gospel is the first of 4 biographical accounts of Jesus. Matthew was an eyewitness to much of what he writes in his account, having been invited by Jesus to leave his tax collector job and follow him. As a disciple, and Matthew, of course, did. And Matthew's Gospel is placed at the beginning of the New Testament in our Bibles, which is a great decision because Matthew's Gospel brilliantly weaves together the Old Testament to the life of Jesus. Throughout his Gospel, again and again, you read words like, "You've heard it said," or "This was done in order to fulfill what was promised or prophesied." Matthew is trying to bridge together an ancient Hebrew Jewish world with law and prophets and psalms and songs into the 1st century AD through the central figure, Jesus. And we see that nowhere better than in the opening 17 verses. Matthew's Gospel opens with the words, "This is the genealogy, the beginnings, the origins, the genesis, if you like, of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham." It is a pretty weighty opener. I'd encourage you right now to pause this video and read the list of names that you find in Matthew chapter 1, verse 1 to 17. You might not understand them, you might not even be able to pronounce them correctly, but have a go anyway. Stop this video now and read the first 17 verses of Matthew's Gospel and then press play again. If you've just followed my advice and listened and read through Matthew chapter 1, you'll have read loads and loads of different names. We're going to break it down a little bit to help us. You'll read, if you've read any of the Old Testament, then you'll see a number of different times lists of names of different genealogies. I wonder if you know yours. Mine is Craig, son of Derek, Derek, son of Mervyn, son of James, and I think that's it. As far as I know, it's sad really to think that all generations have come before me, but I only know 3 or 4. Some of you might have gone back through and found out some of your family history. For Hebrews, for Jewish people at the time of this writing, genealogies were important, and particularly so if they were linked to royalty or the priesthood, because these were hereditary offices. Kings and priests were passed down from generation to another, and so you were far more likely to know who your great-great-great-great-great-granddad was than I am. Matthew tells us that this is the genealogy of not just any priest or king, but Jesus, the Messiah. Jesus means the God who saves, and Messiah is a Hebrew word from which we get the Greek equivalent, Christos or Christ. So Jesus the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And Messiah and Christ means exactly the same thing. It literally means the anointed one. A guy called Michael Reidlink writes in the Moody Handbook of Messianic Prophecy that the Messiah is the eschatological, which means the end of days, royal servant of the Lord, springing from the Davidic dynasty, who is consecrated by God to provide redemption from sin, bring deliverance for Israel, rule the world, and establish a kingdom of peace, justice, and righteousness. That is a pretty big deal. The Bible opens with God and humanity in perfect relationship and friendship, and tells how our ancestors exchanged that perfection for a lie. They disobeyed God and became poisoned, not with a virus, but with sin that would separate them from God, enslave us all in shame and rage and rebellion and pain. And we see evidence of it everywhere, in every human being. And right at the beginning, in the pain of seeing his very good creation fall, God promised that in the context of a consequence of a human choice, one would come who would crush the head of the liar and defeat the lie forever. Throughout the Old Testament, promises were made, hints were given. People looked like this one who was coming, but weren't him. Someone was coming. And Matthew is saying, the anointed one has come. It is a pretty big title and claim. The anointed one. A few years ago, if you're a football fan, you'll remember Jose Mourinho called himself the special one. But he just managed a couple of football teams and won a few trophies. The anointed one is the servant of God who'll rule the world, deal with sin, and usher in an eternal kingdom of righteousness, peace, and joy at the end of all things. Matthew, from straight away off the bat, says that Jesus is this Messiah. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Matthew, in his opening sentence, calls Jesus the son of Abraham. Abraham is one of the most important people in world history, the father of faith. Important, of course, in the Islamic tradition, the Jewish tradition, and of course, in Jesus, for all the Christians too. That is more than half the people on this world who would say they've been impacted by this one man. Genesis tells us that out of everyone, God chose Abraham from a little place called Ur, and blessed him and gave him many promises. And one of those was that through him a nation would be born, and that through that nation one would come through whom all nations would be blessed. God was restoring what had been lost in Eden through a people that would produce a person, the person who at just the right time would come and heal and save. Jesus, Matthew is telling us, is the promise made to Abraham fulfilled. Jesus is God's promise revealed and kept, the promise of salvation, of deliverance, of being made right in God's eyes. Jesus is the promise of God fulfilled, that people now can be made right with God again. People can walk with God again and be in friendship with God again and can know God again and talk to God again and be with God again. Jesus is the promise of God fulfilled. He is the son of Abraham. But Matthew 2 records the son of David. We've just seen over the last few weeks the inauguration of Donald Trump as 47th president of the United States. He and Grover Cleveland have been president twice elected. And so in reality, there's been 45 presidents, like this bit of trivia. And sometimes historians and political philosophers like to rank and grade them in some kind of order. And usually in the top, there's Abraham Lincoln, who won the Civil War and ended human slavery, or George Washington, the founding president who established the Republic and saw a nation born, or Franklin Roosevelt, who led a nation through the Great Depression in the 1930s and then led the US and the world to victory over Nazism and fascism and Japanese imperialism in World War II. President Trump would have to do something pretty special to break into that club. For the Hebrews of the first century, Abraham and David were like those grand presidents. And if there had been a Mount Rushmore, they would have been on it, maybe with Moses. But Abraham was the father of faith and David was the king. David was the great king, a rags to riches story that you can read about in 1 and 2 Samuel, and how this one-time shepherd boy, rugged and handsome, became king of Israel, extending its territory, dominion and prestige in immense ways. Matthew's writing it in the 1st century to the nation of Judea under occupation of the Roman Empire with its own system of rule and reign. And so thinking back to a moment of Hebrew success, well, that's a thrill. Today, of course, the state of Israel has the Star of David as its symbol on its flag. And so still today, David's name and legacy looms large in our world. Matthew is calling Jesus the Son of David. That's a huge title too, because some of the promises of the Old Testament that talks of this Messiah, this Christ coming, like Isaiah's, for unto us a child is born and a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders. He'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Isaiah 9 tells us that he will sit on David's throne. Jeremiah promises that God will raise a branch from David who will rule forever. Ezekiel promises that God will raise a new shepherd over his people and calls him my servant David, be prince among them. David was the archetypal king, the hero, the champion of people, who destroys enemies, win victories, establish peace. He'd be kind and good, a poet, a songwriter, a worshipper of God, a writer of psalms that would proclaim God's reign and rule. And for a little while there was a piece of earth where God was known under David. The Old Testament prophesies that, and more. A better king is coming. And Matthew says it. Jesus is the Son of David. A better king was here. King David was described as a man after God's own heart. And so here's Jesus, promise fulfilled, King has come. From the prophets and the Psalms, all pointing to him, the one who's arrived. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of David, the Son of Abraham. And after getting past that first sentence, you read all of these different names. And in them, they become like a tapestry of the Old Testament. You read the stories of many of these people scattered throughout the pages of Genesis and Judges and 1 Samuel, the Kings, Chronicles, throughout the pages of the major and the minor prophets. You read some of the words they wrote or spoke, and we see tiny biographies of some of these people in Matthew chapter 1. And we discover that the line of Jesus, the promise keeper, the King of the ages, is a pretty mixed bag. There are the good, the bad, and the ugly of Israel's past, all contained in this list of names. And even the best of them have massive flaws. Abraham, whilst he believed in God, also very much didn't when he slept with his wife's slave and caused an ethnic divide which plays out in the Middle East even to today. His grandson was a liar. David was a murderer and adulterer as well as being king. And those two guys, they're on Mount Rushmore of our selection. Manasseh, verse 10, he sacrificed his own children in the fire in worship of a pagan god Moloch. There are kings who lied and cheated, who raped and pillaged and burned in this list. It is a family line that if you did discover it, you might want to try and keep quiet about some of these things. But Matthew is showing us something in listing all of these things. He's telling us that God's purpose can be fulfilled, whatever your family of origin is, whatever your background or life circumstance, however you were conceived, whatever home you were raised in, this God has a way of fulfilling what he says. And he even uses our rubbish to achieve his good ends. Amongst the list of all of these names, another interesting twist of Matthew's genealogy is the unusual, really, but brilliant addition of some women. Matthew is telling us that Jesus is the anointed one, the one who fulfills God's promise of relationship through ruling rightly forever, and that he's come from the best and worst of humanity through the seed and wombs of men and women. Hebrew genealogies were often ways of showing off your ethnic and racial purity, sort of look where we've come from. And in many ways that was what God had decreed for priests and kings, but God also knows our reality, our messiness, our sin. And in this line, these four women shine a spotlight on that. Tamar in verse 3. You have to read Genesis 38 about that. It is a really messed up account of how Judah, one of Jesus' titles is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, slept with his daughter-in-law and got her pregnant. How weird is that? Tamar. Rahab, you read that, her name further down in this list. You read her story in Joshua 2, a prostitute of Jericho who helps the Hebrews in their moment of distress and conquest. Ruth, in this list, a Moabite who has a Bible book named after her and tells her story. The Moabites were this polytheistic culture, worshipping many, many gods, but this Ruth was brought in and rescued and found favor. And finally, Uriah's wife, verse 6, Bathsheba, whom King David had an adulterous relationship with, and whose husband, Uriah, one of David's mighty men, a leading soldier in his army, had been killed in order for David to have Bathsheba as his wife and cover up their adulterous affair. It is all a bit weird, isn't it? And that's what's incredible about the Bible. History is often written by the victors, and so often mistakes are carefully rubbed out, but the Bible is a warts all account, my friends, because we are warts and all. The genealogy of Jesus shows the brilliant patience of God weaving through human history, through its sin and degradation, its rebellion and its misery, its heartache and its pain, because he is relentless in his pursuit of us through saving love. One of the other Gospels, John, opens in his prologue and includes the line that Jesus came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Jesus was a Jewish man, but despite the miracles and the authority and the power and the invitation, they crucified him. Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba in this genealogy show us something. None of those women were Jews. And in Matthew, the most Jewish of gospel writers, recording this is giving us an insight that Jesus didn't come just to save a particular ethnic, racial group, but he came to save the whole world, Jew and Gentile, male and female, all of us everywhere, always. This is no ordinary person. This son of Abraham, this son of David, he is the anointed King of all. And at the end of our reading, verse 17, Matthew, through skipping a few names out and taking a little genealogical license, tells us that there are 14 generations 3 times over. He's making another subtle point. In the Hebrew alphabet, there are 22 characters, and again and again, he's made mention of King David in this. David's name is made up of 3 of those letters, the 4th, the 6th, and the 4th again. And each Hebrew alphabet also has a numeric value. And so the 4th has the value 4, the 6th has the value 6, the 4 has the value 4th. And so 4 plus 6 plus 4 is 14. Matthew is making the point by saying 14 generations from here to there and here to there, is making the point again. King David, 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 King, King, King. Jesus is King of kings and Lord of all. Let's end this. As we read the Matthew Gospel together, the Gospel of Matthew together in our Bible reading groups, as we live our lives together, we do so in the context of Jesus, unique, the promised one, the one who promised blessing and home and relationship forever, the one who's come as King to rescue us from our enemy and defeat sin forever, the knowable Lord, and he's mine and he can be yours. And his coming not only fulfilled all this, but through his death and resurrection has started something that will last forever. He is making a people for himself. John's Gospel tells us that though his own rejected him, all those who received him, he gave the right to become the children of God. Children born not of natural descent, a human decision, a husband's will, but born of God. John tells us that we've seen the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Do you know him? Do you know this Jesus? And if you don't, you can today. You can ask him to reveal himself to you, to forgive your sin, to transform your life. And if you do claim to know him, do you? And today, if you do, why not stop again in wonder and love and praise and renew your commitment to follow him and serve him and worship him forever? Jesus, the Christ, the Son of David, the Son of Abraham, King forever. He is worthy of our trust. He is worthy of our praise. He's worthy of our lives. And so will you give yours for him? Will you submit yours to him? Will you worship this King and follow him anew to that glorious end?